and you are all set.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the follow-up to the Research Metrics Hot Topic Discussion Group presentation we gave just before midwinter. So it's Hot Topics Revisits Research Metrics. It is put on by the ACRL Science and Technology Section Hot Topics Discussion Group. I am Peter Larson. I am co-chair with Kathy Lance, who is also present, and she and the incoming co-chair, Mike Goetz, will be fielding your questions. Our presenter today is Stefanie Haustein, who is an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa's School of Information Studies and co-director of the ScholarCom Lab, a research group that analyzes all aspects of scholarly communication in the digital age. Her research focuses on scholarly communication, bibliometrics, altmetrics, and open science. If you would hold your questions until the end, there'll be a section about 20 minutes at the end for questions. Although if you think of them in the middle, feel free to throw them in the chat. And please give all things by chat. All questions by chat. We are recording, and the recording will be available to you probably within a week, maybe a little sooner. Anyway, Stefanie, with that, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, for the introduction, and to the whole group for inviting me back. So today I want to follow up while the hot topic in January already started with a really general overview of scholarly metrics, where Cassidy and I talked about adverse effects and limitations and some advantages of scholarly metrics. Today I want to focus in on one particular index, the H-index, and I want to show you how to not use them. So, and if you're saying, well, the H-index, I know everything about it, I already know I shouldn't be using it, I think this presentation will hopefully provide you with a little bit more, because I want to focus mostly also on how you can learn, but also how you can teach others. So I'm thinking about that a lot of you are probably scholarly communication librarians or research impact librarians, and you often have to explain to researchers at your institutions what kind of metrics make sense or not. So I'm really focused on something that I call metrics literacies, and I'll tell you in a second what that really means. So I'll tell you a bit about that project that we're currently working on, and then I'm going to dive into lots of specifics about the H-index, and I'll do that in a probably a little bit different way. So I'm going to use storytellings and personas that we developed to really dive into the problems with the H-index, and I'm going to finish up with some conclusions. So there will be lots of time, hopefully, at the end for questions, but I also have two small forms for you to fill out, just small questions to get some feedback from you, because we're at the early stages of this project, and we're really hoping that you as librarians who at probably mostly academic libraries will help us make this better. So really hoping to get lots of questions and feedback today. So the whole motivation for this project is that we think that we really need to improve the way in which metrics are used in academia. So there's lots of misuse going on. There are lots of really often meaningless rankings that are being used to rank universities or even candidates or research grants and so on. And I think that's a big problem. At the same time, I think each and every researcher always complains that they already have way too much to read in their own field. So why would we expect them to actually read bibliometric literatures on top of that? I think that's a bit too much to expect. So the whole idea of this project was, why do we not create open educational resources, and mostly using audiovisual formats instead of text to inform them? So if you go on YouTube, there's so many really, really cool informative videos on simple topics, but also really complex science topics. So we thought, why not do that exactly with bibliometrics as well? So the vision statement for this Metrics Literacies project is that we want to improve the understanding and appropriate use of scholarly metrics in academia. And our definition of metrics literacies is that they are an integrated set of competencies, dispositions, and knowledge that empower individuals to recognize, interpret, critically assess, and effectively and ethically use scholarly metrics. So if you're familiar, and I think most of you will be, with the information literacy definition and the framework, then you will probably notice some of these definitions or formulations. So we adapted this on different literacies definitions. So our project wants to develop open educational resources to support metrics literacies using mostly audiovisual material. And we also want to do research on what type of format is actually best. So we want to experimentally test and identify the most effective types of OERs that would help academics and research administrators, including librarians, to appropriately apply and understand research metrics. And in the end, we want to disseminate these OERs using a CC BY license to see, well, increase metrics literacies all over, and also see what kind of format works best. So I'm not doing this alone. We have a whole very diverse project team. So at the University of Ottawa, it's me and my copia, Michelle Scherer-Hargeman, who's at the Faculty of Education and has lots of experience with digital literacies. And then I have two RAs, Alyssa and Sanam, who've been helping me a lot to write a grant proposal and also to develop the project further. And then we have a whole team for bibliometric expertise. So Robin Champieu, some of you might know, she's on board. Then we have Carrie Mingli Chen, Isabel Dorsch at Heinrich Heine University in Düsseldorf, who's been working on the project a lot. And you'll also see some really nice persona sketches by her later. And then we have Elizabeth Gatt in the UK, who's a research policy manager. But we also have a media production team. So we have a film prof, a YouTuber whose channel, Stacks and Facts, I really encourage you to check out, and a podcast host, so that we have really experts that help us to produce the best audiovisual OERs. And then in the end, we have a whole community outreach team who will help us to better spread these OERs and communicate about metrics. We're using a knowledge to action framework here. And we have three main phases of the project, and we're still at the beginning and waiting, hopefully, for funding soon. But the first phase is that we create some open educational resources. And the idea here is that we're actually using the same content, but only switching up the format of the OERs to really test what type of video, maybe podcast, other type of media works best. And then we're going to test these formats, going to improve them, and then release them online to then also measure what kind of these OERs are actually taken up by people online and watched and liked and shared on social media. So phase 2 is the main research stage, where we'll test the effectiveness of the different OER formats. So we're going to have a survey, and this focuses on the H-index because we needed to focus on one case study. And we think the H-index is one of the most popular, but also most problematic bibliometric indicators. So we're asking researchers and research managers what they already know about the H-index before they've seen the OER and after, so pre-test, post-test format. And the participants will be randomly assigned to either look at the control, and the control in our case is kind of a fact sheet, like it's a written document with citations in it about the facts of the H-index. And then the OERs are the audiovisual formats, and they will have the same content, but obviously a different format. So we're then going to test what participants learned more and retain more information about the H-index compared to the control. So one really important thing that we've been using is storytelling to make the open educational resources better and make them more interesting for researchers to watch. Because we said in the beginning, well, researchers are already overwhelmed, they don't have enough time, so why would they spend time on reading about metrics as well, right? So our idea was here to create different personas at different career stages from different cultural and academic backgrounds at different ages and different disciplines to kind of have researchers identify with one or some of them so that we can actually tell stories, because there's lots of literature that says if you're using storytelling, then people will pay more attention and they will also retain more knowledge compared to just listing facts, right? And especially in an attention economy where we only spend these days a few minutes on one thing or the other, it's really, really important to grab someone's attention. So we created 4 different personas, and we're still in the stage of developing them. So we also would really love your feedback today. So I want to read you the intros or the short description of these personas. So we have a PhD student. His name is Paulo Barbosa. He's a 33-year-old PhD student just finishing up his PhD in public health at the public university in Pernambuco State in the northeast region of Brazil. That region was also the leading region to fight, investigate, and research about the Zika virus outbreak in 2015 and 2016. Paulo studies neglected diseases and dreams about finding the vaccine for emerging diseases transmitted by mosquitoes. He began listening to podcasts during the long-hour experiments when he would not be able to take short breaks. He gets a postdoc grant from the federal government and is always worried about receiving laboratory supplies and ethics committee evaluation on time. Paulo is an open science enthusiast and believes his research must be accessed easily by everyone. Then we have Mariam. Mariam, she represents a postdoc. Mariam Hashemi is a postdoctoral researcher at a university in Tehran in Iran. She has a PhD in biotechnology from the same university. She's 34 years old and looking for a tenure-track position in a biology department, preferably at a Canadian university. She knows that in her field, the H-index plays an important role in hiring and promotion, and is therefore debating whether or not she should include it when applying for a position. She has only 3 peer-reviewed publications, of which one is cited 291 times in Google Scholar. She's really proud of it because it's her first author journal article. The other 2 papers are cited 12 times and once respectively, so her H-index is 2. Then we have the pre-tenure professor, Ying Wang. So Ying is a tenured track professor at a university in the Midwest in the US. She has a PhD in physics from a university in Beijing, China. She is expected to go up for tenure this year. Since her research contributions are going to be evaluated, she usually checks her citations and the H-index. Ying always thought that the H-index is a great tool to help assess scientific impact. Of course, people are always approving towards indexes that make themselves look good. Her H-index is 22. She has heard that for physicists, a value of about 40 could mean full professorship. And then finally, we have our tenured professor, George Clark. He's 56 from the UK. George is a full professor at the Department of English Literature at a Russell Group University in the UK. George is 56 years old, married, and has 2 kids. He has been doing research in English literature since he began his PhD more than 30 years ago. Before becoming a professor and moving to his current university in his early 40s, he had been a lecturer at his alma mater, a university in his hometown. He also spent 2 years as a postdoc at an Ivy League university in the United States. So those are our personas in a nutshell, and you'll be seeing them again later on. Again, a big shout out to Isabel here for those really great sketches, which we thought really brought our personas to life. So in a nutshell, what do we want to do with this metrics literacies project? We want to increase metrics literacies among researchers and research administrators. Why do we want to do that? Well, ultimately, we hope to reduce the misuse of scholarly metrics in academia. And we're just doing this with the H-index as a case study. Ideally, we would expand this to other bibliometrics and other scholarly metrics. How are we doing this? We're hoping to create efficient, effective, and high-quality open educational resources, most of them in audiovisual format. So for this first part, I would love to get some feedback. So if you open this short link here, bit.ly/metricslit with a capital M and capital L, there are 3 questions, and I would just love to hear from you If you think that this kind of approach using open educational resources, mostly in audiovisual format and using storytelling and personas, would actually improve how scholarly metrics are understood and used in academia. And we would also love to hear what you think for yourself, but also maybe for the researchers that you interact with, what types of OERs you would prefer. So either videos, and that could already be some kind of different format, so animation or interviews, podcasts, infographic, video games, or any other types of resources you could come up with. And we would also love to hear what you would do differently. So I'll give you maybe like 3 minutes or so to fill this out, because I would love to hear and get feedback. And if you have questions that don't fit into this, into the Google form here, into these 3 questions, please don't hesitate to leave comments in the chat. So I'll give you a few minutes and then I'll continue with the second part. Oh yeah, thanks Catherine for putting the link in there. I should probably say we're not going to use this, your answers for any research. It's really just to help us develop the project further. And maybe I should also add that we started with these 4 personas to cover the 4 main career stages as a researcher, but we also have one of our audiences is research librarians and research managers, so people that work in the research office, for example, at a university. And we have considered creating personas for that, but we haven't gotten to that yet. So if you have any kind of feedback of how a persona for a librarian that interacts with metrics would look like, that would be great as well. All right, so I'm gonna, oh, sorry. I'm just seeing the comment here. So the personas are not all from the Western Hemisphere. So we have someone from Iran who wants to move to Canada. We have a Chinese physicist who is in the US. We have somebody in the UK, and we have somebody in Brazil. So we were looking for diversity, but yeah, maybe the additional personas, the librarians, maybe we could also make them come from Africa, for example. So we're really hoping to reach a as broad as possible audience, or we're really hoping for diversity, not only geographically, but also in terms of disciplines. So that's why we have people that are still doing their PhD, those doing their postdoc and looking for positions, somebody applying for tenure, and those that have already gotten tenure. Oh yeah, and I just see the comment that yes, librarians are also not everywhere, but especially in the US and in Canada here as well, faculty members, so they also apply for tenure and often use the HNX too. I would hope that after the second part, they would include a statement why they wouldn't use the HNX, but we'll probably talk about that at the beginning. So I'm gonna close the chat window right now and gonna get back to the second part, but I'm really happy to answer your questions at the end. So for the second part, I really want to teach you something about the HNX, but also really how you can teach others not to use it, using those personas and the storytelling. So let's start with the formula and computation. So I guess most of you probably know what the H-index is, but when you read the definition by Hirsch, it says a scientist has index H if H of his or her NP papers have at least H citations each, and the other NP minus H papers have less than H citations each. That sounds really complicated, but if you look at an example, it's really simple. So all you do is you take all the publications that somebody has. So in this example, there are 10, and then you rank them descendingly by the number of citations. And then wherever the citation is the same or higher than the rank, that's what the H-index is. So here you have the H-index of 4. So if you put this in here, you say a scientist has H-index of 4 if his or her 10 papers have at least 4 citations each, and the other NP minus H papers have less than 4 citations each. So the formula sounds very complex, but then in an example, it's really simple to grasp. It was originally introduced in 2005 by a physicist. So this wasn't somebody from the bibliometric community, but a physicist that thought he could come up with a parameter, as he said it, to quantify an author's research impact. The problem is in the computation that any publication outside the H core, so anything, the publications 5 to 10 here, are completely disregarded. So like this would be the same as if they hadn't published any more than these 4 papers. It also disregards any citations above H. So if you get additional citations for these papers here, and the fact that they have 5, 7, and 10, that's completely disregarded too. It's really just reduced to this number of 4 publications with 4 citations each. And in addition to these main, like really simple problems, it also has a number of flawed properties that lead to really inconsistent results if you compare researchers. So Ludo Waldman and Nees-Jan van Eck, they're bibliometricians from the Netherlands. They have published this paper more than 10 years ago showing that the H-index violates a number of properties, which they then conclude that it leads to inconsistent results. So one example would be if 2 researchers have the same H-index, they both get an additional citation. One H-index might go up, while the other one might stay the same. So that's very counterintuitive. And because of these problematic properties of the H-index, they concluded that the H-index cannot be considered an appropriate indicator. So if we want to talk about the formula and computation, but not do it in this like hard fact kind of way, but use storytelling, then we could go back to our example Mariam here. She has 3 papers, as we already knew, and her H-index is 2. So if you use storytelling, you could say Mariam saw on her Google Scholar profile that her H-index was 2. It's so low because she has only published 3 journal articles so far, and her most recent one has only been cited once. So that would be an example of how you could, in the same kind of way, visualize or explain that the H-index doesn't disregards any publications and citations outside the H-core with more of a story behind it. And I also have an example here for you. So I should say this is just a draft, and we're hoping with more available resources to do this more professionally. But one way of visualizing this too might be with a stop motion video. So I've used Lego here to just visualize the data by Mariam and what the problem is. So she has 3 publications, overall 304 citations, but her H-index is only 2. And so I just want to play this to you. It doesn't have sound yet. And again, it's just a rough draft, but you see her papers there in orange and her citations in pink. And then it's reduced to the age of 2 because anything else really doesn't count. So the papers outside the H-core don't count. And the citations above 2 also don't count. So I'm just going to show it again. So her 3 papers, the citations 112 and 291, and then it's reduced to 2. So that's just a rough idea of how we could use storytelling, but also audiovisual media and maybe something engaging like Lego and stop motion to explain what the problem is here. Using another example, George, our full professor from English literature, George has an H-index of 5, as he recently found out through the research office of his faculty. They told him that this meant that 5 of his publications had been cited 5 or more times in the Web of Science. As a full professor in English literature, George has authored over 50 publications, many of which were monographs and edited volumes, which are apparently not indexed in the Web of Science and thus not counted towards the H-index. So in his example here, you see that his H-index is 5, but actually a lot of his publications are not even covered by the usual, like by the journal, peer-reviewed journal citation database. So his number of publications is limited to 18 here, but what really counts in the end is just 5 publications that have received more than 5 citations. So one of the things that we'll look in later too is that it already comes out here is the disciplinary difference, right? So the Web of Science just doesn't cover English literature as well as it does biotechnology. So another problem of the H-index is that it really lacks a clear concept, because the computational method tries to combine 2 variables in a really awkward way. So the number of publications and the number of citations. And by doing that, in the way it's computed, it dilutes these 2 really distinct dimensions of publications, productivity, citations, impact. And because publications are dominant here, like you can only reach a certain H-index with a certain number of publications, the H-index can actually never exceed one's number of publications. And it also, in addition to this problematic combination of 2 variables, it also suffers the same limitations as any other bibliometric indicator. So we know that citations do not necessarily indicate quality. They might not even indicate positive impact either. Like there are cases where citations are negative. And the absence of publications and citations for a researcher does not prove that he's worthless. So that's really big issues in terms of the concept. In terms of storytelling, if we go back to Mariam, she thinks that the H-index is quite confusing. She's not sure what it means at all. She also thinks that it is not fair to reduce a researcher to a single number. She believes that she doesn't need dozens of articles to be a good researcher or lots of citations to be known internationally. In her opinion, her low H-index does not reflect the scientific impact because it does not show the success of her first authored paper, which according to Google Scholar was cited 291 times. Then we also have the problem that because the H-index depends on the number of publications, it depends on the duration of a scientist's career. So in order to reach a high number of publications and citations, you have to have been publishing for a while. So it's really, the indicator is really not able to capture early career researchers' impact. So we shouldn't compare researchers of different academic age. And Hirsch also had this really arbitrary definition of how high an H-index should be after 20 years of publishing. So he says 20 to be a successful researcher, 40 for outstanding, and 60 for unique, but this might maybe be true for his field of physics and after 20 years, but it's very arbitrary. So it also shows it doesn't work for early career researchers. So Mariam thinks that the H-index is pretty unfair when it comes to measuring the success of early career researchers who have not yet published a lot. She also thinks that it takes way too long for the H-index to increase due to the time it takes to accumulate citations. She has submitted 2 manuscripts to different journals, but it takes 5 to 7 months for a paper to get accepted and another couple of years for them to accumulate citations. So she's not very optimistic that her H-index will increase anytime soon. There's also this really huge problem of the lack of field normalization. So we know that different disciplines have different behaviors in terms of how many authors they have per paper, which leads to an average productivity, the length of reference list, and also the frequency of publications in general. So fields with long lists of co-authors will produce higher publication counts on average, and fields with longer reference lists and higher publication frequency will also create higher citation rates. So both of these things lead to higher HNDCs. So one should not compare a researcher from English literature with somebody from biotech. Unfortunately, it's often done. So here we have the example of George. George is applying for his university's Researcher of the Year award, and the application package must include the professor's H-index. As he read up on the H-index, he found that his inventor estimated that an outstanding researcher would have an H-index of 40 after 20 years. George has been an active researcher for more than 30 years, and his H-index of 5 was far below what Hirsch calls a successful scientist. When he looked up the engineering professor who received the research award last year, he found out that it was 45. George is worried that we will not stand a chance to win the award, even if the 10,000 pounds of research funding would help him to hire a research assistant for his current project. He wonders whether it's worth going through the hassle of applying at all. There's also the problem of like which H-index to pick. So depending on database coverage, Google Scholar, Dimension, Scopus, Web of Science, the H-index will be different. And also because most of citation databases focus on peer-reviewed journal articles and don't include proceedings papers or monographs, most of the H-indexes also disregard these kind of documents, which again affects certain disciplines more than others. Here we have Paolo's example. Paolo thinks that the H-index is mathematically very simple and likes that it is readily available via Google Scholar, Scopus, and Web of Science. However, he noticed that the H-index of the same researcher often differed between Scopus, Web of Science, and Google Scholar. He's quite confused about what his actual H-index is. According to the Web of Science, it's 2, Scopus says it's 3, and Google Scholar lists his H-index as 4. He also joined ResearchGate last month and saw that his H-index there was 0. Then we have this huge issue of popularity. So although the H-index has been proven by bibliometricians to not be a good indicator and has lots of other flaws and shortcomings, it's one of the most widely used and most popular indicators. I think on the one hand, that's due because it's so easily available. So you can go to Google Scholar or Web of Science or almost any other citation database and the H-index is right there. Or if it's not right there, all it takes is basically ordering publications descendingly by number of citations received. So I think that definitely has something or influences the popularity. The other thing is also its simplicity. So people really like simple things where they can rank easily. And from a survey here or study by Derrick and Gillespie, you see that a researcher said the H-index is a good metric because it gives you a bit of a yardstick to be able to judge people on in terms of their track record. Unfortunately, the H-index is also used very frequently for hiring, tenure, and promotion decisions. Like the example that somebody brought up earlier even for librarians, tenure applications, and academic awards or even research funds. So in the study by Derrick and Gillespie, they found that more than 70% of researchers included the H-index on their CV and on promotion applications. And the researchers just feel when they're in the role of evaluators that they need a yardstick to measure and compare researcher value. And you might also know that there are quite a number of academic libraries that have tailored workshops to help people find out their own H-index, mostly for their own CVs or tenure applications. In terms of storytelling, Mariam is a postdoctoral researcher, and she's looking for a tenure track position in a biology department. She has heard from her doctoral supervisor and other postdocs that the H-index is quite important in her field, and that it is sometimes even used to make hiring and promotion decisions. Her doctoral supervisor said that the H-index is a great indicator because it is a single number that measures scientific performance, and it ranks researchers according to their productivity. At H equals 2, Mariam's H-index is low because she has only published 3 journal articles so far. She's worried that hiring committees will select candidates based on the H-index and that her low score would not get her invitations to be interviewed for a tenure track position. Because it's so popular, we get a lot of uninformed use and even misuse. So most researchers, even though they use it, they don't even know really what the H-index is, how it's calculated. And so they often lack enough background information and don't account for researchers' career length. So comparing early career researchers to senior researchers, they also don't account for disciplinary differences. So end up maybe for some awards, as we've seen in the example of George, comparing engineering to English literature. And also they often don't account for discrepancies between databases. So often when application packages ask for the H-index, they don't specify which database and not even when you should retrieve it. So people basically, or applicants usually go for whatever database has their highest H-index. The real big problem is that when used in hiring and promotion, this kind of uninformed misuse can affect entire academic careers. So when universities ask applicants to provide the H-index and use it as a threshold, even to provide shortlists, they might drop a lot of high quality researchers just because they don't meet that threshold. And even if they are not officially asking for it or using it, every individual evaluator might still use the H-index as this kind of yardstick. So George, again, with his example of the Researcher of the Year award that he's applying for, it's a prestigious prize and comes with £10,000 of research funding. He's not sure how exactly the committee will use the H-index, but he has heard that the H-index is sometimes used to shortlist candidates, to rank researchers in ref preparedness exercises, or as a bargaining chip in salary negotiations or in grant allocations. He's worried that the Research of the Year committee will judge his work based on his H-index and that he will not get the £10,000 of funding. And finally, the most problematic category is when people try to boost their own metrics or kind of game the system. And Campbell's law here comes to mind that says the more any quantitative social indicator is used for social decision making, the more subject it will be to corruption pressures. So researchers will inevitably adapt their publication behavior to increase their own H-index or any other bibliometric. They might do this by increasing citation counts, so either strategically self-citing their own publications that are just outside the H-score to increase the H-index, or even asking others. And that can happen in organized citation cartels. We've seen that for a number of journals that after got disqualified from the Web of Science for a while when it was outed. But it also can happen in the review process. If you're a reviewer, or if your paper is getting reviewed, reviewers might ask you to cite some of their papers to increase their citation scores. Another way to increase the H-index is increase one's publication counts, and that can be done by honorary authorship. So basically just putting someone's name on a paper and maybe getting another free paper in return to just increase one's publication count, or so-called salami publishing, where you slice a manuscript in 3 smaller ones to basically publish the same thing, but in 3 instead of 1 paper. And Kotov here from 2010 has actually argued that these kind of manipulations or boosting one's own metrics should be considered a form of scientific misconduct and fraud. So in terms of storytelling, here we have Ying, and she experienced during the review process for a recent paper that she got asked by one of the reviewers to cite a number of his papers. Since they were not directly related to her study, she got curious and found out that additional citations to these papers would have boosted the reviewer's H-index. Since she wanted to get her manuscript accepted, she ended up citing 2 of the 3 papers the reviewer had suggested. Ying is going up for tenure this year, so she was wondering if she should do the same the next time she's a reviewer. She then read that this type of behavior could be considered scientific misconduct and decided against it. So now I have another little link for you, so bit.ly/metrics story with a capital M, capital S. And I would like to hear what you thought about the storytelling approach. So now that you've heard a little bit, and for each of those issues with the H-index, you've seen an example of how storytelling can be used. We would also love to hear how you like the personas. And if you would use OER, so we're talking about videos, maybe podcasts, mostly audiovisual, non-textual formats, if you would use this in one form or another, if they included storytelling and persona. So again, I give you a couple of minutes, and then there will be time for questions. And I'm looking forward to that. I also see a lot of comments of like variants of the H-index, so H5, or they're also, I think the M-index is when you reduce it, or I think divided by the researcher's publication age. That's true. I know there are variations, but they actually suffer mostly the same or very similar computational issues. So I didn't go into all of the details, but it's true. Yeah, some of the variants help with one thing or the other, but they're all still based on this really flawed combination of publications and citations. Oh, and also the question about, yeah, starting your career late. So usually, if it's done well, they should be looking at like your publication age. So like when you published your first paper, and if you switch the career, so let's say maybe you were a chemist before, then they should probably like focus on your library and information science output and not so much on the chemistry output if that's what you're applying for. But yeah, things get more complex if you're switching careers or disciplines and so on. I also, yeah, I saw the publication by Hirsch recently where he actually admitted that, yeah, maybe that wasn't such a great idea. I also love to hear more from Willa, who said that she advocated for narrative approaches to bibliometrics and context. I think that's a really great idea. And another question before I go to the conclusions, because I see it here. Yes, the H-index is usually defined for authors, so like including all the papers by a certain author, but actually you can apply this kind of like ranking method or computation method to any set of papers. So you can apply it to journals too. But it doesn't help with, like, it still has the same flaws for different disciplines, younger journals, and the same computational issue of combining publications and citations in this weird way. All right, so I hope that most of you were able to fill out the little Google form. I just want to conclude that I think, or we think that it's really important that we need to educate researchers and research administrators about Scully metrics because they're heavily used, and the people that have been inventing metrics haven't really thought about this education part and the misuse, I think. We think that storytelling and the user personas can really help to draw attention to these kind of educational formats, and they definitely help increase retention. And this goes especially for audiovisual OERs because they're more efficient and effective. And I think there's so many great examples out there. For example, Minute Physics, if you know that, where like super complex topics are explained in a very efficient and effective way just by using the audio and the visual channel at the same time. So this is it for me, and I'm looking forward to any additional questions. So I'm trying to catch your questions. So there's one that says, how can I, as an individual librarian, help individual researchers succeed in a bad system, while at the same time helping to dismantle that bad system? Something I wrestle with on a daily basis. If these OERs could help address this issue, it would be great. So this comes from Christy. This is a great question. And so during my PhD, I also worked in an academic library in a research center in Germany and in a bibliometrics team. And I got these same questions of like, can you give me my impact factor, like my cumulative impact factor, my H-index? And I would always say, but these indicators aren't really good. And you should, if you want to use some, you should use this instead. And I got these mixed replies. Like sometimes the researcher was like, I understand and I totally know, but I still want to get this grant, so I have to submit this indicator. And others were still reluctant and said, well, this is common in my field, so I use it. So I think we have to, as librarians, like continue to tell the same story, although it can be quite hard to, like, you sound like a broken record, right? Like I have been working on this for more than 10 years and I'm still telling exactly the same story of like, don't use this indicator, or don't use the H-index, don't use the impact factor. And so I think you have to kind of sound like a broken record. I think you can help them in a way to say, okay, if you're applying for a position, they ask you for your H-index, then at least make the researcher try to incorporate these flaws in the application package, so that they could say, okay, I'm presenting this to you. By the way, I'm giving you my Google Scholar, my Web of Science, my Scopus citation, H-index, to make you aware there's a difference. But I also advocate against using this because of the early career research or the different career stage issue, because of the disciplinary factor, and because of this lack of a clear concept. So I would say if they can avoid using the indicator, at least add this footnote to educate people. And hopefully over time, if more and more people are educated, the whole system will change. Because in the end, the people that come up with the idea to include it in an application package somewhere, they are also either researchers or research admins, and hopefully we'll educate them at one point that they'll stop doing that. But I know it's a marathon, like it's really hard. Especially if you feel like the researcher just doesn't listen anymore. They, like, once you've given them his H-index, they are gone. The next question I also see, we do a workshop where we show the strengths and limitations of popular metrics, demonstrate using alt metrics, and then helping them. I'm wondering if that means like actual alternative metrics or like alt metrics. Then helping them dig into their CV to write a paragraph about the impact of one of their scholarly output that uses metrics, but does not elevate them unnecessarily and incorporates other reasons why the work is valuable. Yes, metrics toolkits and other codes, they're amazing. So I should have mentioned that before. Robin Champion is also one of the founders of the metrics toolkit. So we think what the metrics toolkit is doing is exactly the first step in the right direction. We want to take it a level further, where what they have, basically all the facts and again in written information, we want to turn it into audiovisual. But in general, I think it's already better to write about impacts of individual papers and explain maybe why that one publication had so many citations or why the other one had coverage in the news or something like that. So I really value the narrative approach, if there's room for it, right? So altmetrics, so I've been researching those a lot during my postdoc. Unfortunately, I don't think they're a good alternative. They have their own flaws in many of them. I think altmetrics are a good way to start the storytelling, actually, the narrative about why a certain paper has had impact on social media and so on, but not as a score. So don't use the altmetric score instead of the H-index. That's not really better. Yeah, same, like the outside source that like the H-index is used by university rankings. Administrators ask for it. If you have to supply it, you probably have to, but then again, at least add your footnote, like have a little paragraph, like copy and paste from my slides, they're up on Zenodo, why you shouldn't be using it. I'm also happy to provide you with a like whole written document with footnotes in it. And then the same goes for like universities. Like I found out last year that my university has a ranking committee, which are there to optimize how we appear in rankings. Get people like you on it to advocate against the use of rankings. I don't know how, but yeah, keep trying to educate people. So I'm trying to. Oh yeah, so so how will these OER resources be published when completed? So this is down the road. So we're now hoping to get the funding to actually produce them. And this would be a 2-year project. So we're hoping that in 2 years, we will publish them. Our idea was to put them all on Zenodo into a community. So they're all accessible in the same place. Plus they get a DOI and we get information about how many people viewed them and downloaded them. But then we definitely want to post them in like on social media and in different channels too. Yeah, and so yeah, also really great question from Jay here. What are some other ways to educate administrators and also like other kind of indicators, right? So I didn't include this here because of the lack of time, but there are better ways than the H-index. So a field normalized citation rate is already much better than not normalizing citations. So then you can actually compare somebody in biotechnology with somebody in English literature because you're only comparing them to their own fields. Percentile ranks are also much better than averages because we have such skewed distributions. And it's always better to have a range of metrics rather than this combination of output and impact into one, like the H-index does. Oh yeah, and so name changes. So either when you get married, but also for transgender people, yes, exactly. If you change your name, you have a whole bibliometric issue. For these things, I really recommend using platforms like ORCID. So you can mention on ORCID that you previously published under a different name. And since it's you who's saying yes and no to which publications appear there, you can also control what kind of record is used on you. But that always takes that the people that compile those metrics are aware of it. Yeah, field normalized mean citations. Field normalization always much better than not doing it at all. The average relative citation or field normalized citation rates, they have different names, but similar methodology in terms of that they compare an individual paper's impact to what's expected in that same field and same year, with also differences in how do you define a discipline, which can be complicated and problematic based on the classification system. They're definitely better than using absolute citations or non-normalized citation rates. They still have this big issue that we're, with citations or bibliometrics, always talking about skewed distributions in terms of that you have a lot of papers with 0 or very few citations and little papers with lots of citations. So you have a skewed distribution, and the average, like the arithmetic mean, is not a good indicator for skewed distribution. So in that case, percentile ranks or even showing the whole citation distribution is better than using an average. But field normalized citation rates are still the the standard in bibliometrics these days to compare researchers or institutions or countries that are active in different disciplines. Yeah, so again, like the comment that, yes, they do need alternatives, because unfortunately, any number beats no number. So if you're saying don't do this, but then you don't provide them with an alternative, then they will probably go back to what they know and what is easily available, and that is usually the impact factor and the H-index. So I'm hoping that if we get the funding and are able to expand this project, that we won't only do this on the H-index, obviously. So we want to try this with the H-index as a case study to really do research on what kind of formats work well. But then once we know what formats work well, we want to apply this to the impact factor, to the citation rates, field normalized citation rates, to different journal indicators, to interdisciplinary indicators. So ideally, we want to do what the metrics toolkit does in written form and translate it to audiovisual. So my big dream is that in 5 years, we have a whole platform of open educational resources using audiovisual to make this metrics literacies education more effective. Yes, and we actually do have lots of fun with creating the Lego. So I now professionally play with Lego. It is fun. And I hope it also translates in terms of watching it as more fun than just watching a presentation with the hard facts. Yes, and thank you for sending all these links. I'll definitely go through this afterwards and make sure I'll look at all your helpful comments and links, and also at whatever you left in the Google form. So thank you very much. I'm really glad that you took the time, and I'm really hoping to get lots of feedbacks to make this better, and also to help you as probably research librarians or scholarly communication librarians to make your life easier in educating researchers about it.
All right. Thank you, Stefanie, so much for your presentation. Thank you, attendees, for listening so attentively and participating with questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone.